How does that look for you?
Well, it's a unique challenge in the sense that you want to do exactly what the title says and showcase and let new people see and have a glimpse of what the 23 Jayhawks are going to look like. At the same time, you want to have a sense of work, right? Okay, let's accomplish something, and then you also have to be a little guarded about what's going to be on tape. And so you have those three dynamics that you have to kind of internally evaluate what's going to be priority and how you're going to do it. For us, what I'm excited about is there's a new environment, there's a new stimulus that our players haven't had to work with in the spring that they've got to respond to appropriately, right? So it's a night practice. We had one of those earlier in spring football, but it's a second one, kind of like you would have in a game. One week you might play at 11 a.m., the next week you might play at 7 p.m. Okay, so there's a dynamic there that you have to just learn to operate and adjust to. Hopefully there'll be people there, right? You know what I mean? A decent crowd of fans that they need to perform in front of and do their jobs, right? And you have to balance all that, maintain the expectations of going out there and executing and playing clean football like we would expect and demand at practice. So there's this balancing act of demanding what we demand at practice and expect in games, not showing what we want, you know what I mean, what our opponents will see when it's televised, and then managing the stimulus of, fans.
Do you address that with the guys, or just let them figure it out?
No, we talk about it. We explain, say, listen, here's the things that we're going to call this day. Here's why we're going to call them. You know what I mean? Schematically, there's still an evaluation component in there, which for us that's an everyday thing anyway.
Sure.
But there's still this evaluation component to how are people going to handle this. I'm going to use the word pressure, but it's not pressure because you shouldn't feel that way because in theory, what I mean. We're not really going to keep score per se, but. We do because we're evaluating, we expect execution. So our guys need to be able to go out there and execute and do what they're asked to do, right?
Yeah, perfect.
Lance has talked this spring about being the most physical that he's had with you guys as a staff together. I guess, what does that exactly look like?
How do you modify practice to make it more physical? Is that kind of what you're asking?
Sure,
Or what would be different?
Yeah.
Well, it starts with maybe the rules of engagement, meaning, like if you go, and it's different for every team across the country, but the NCAA caps you on how many days you could go live, right? Which, we understand that's smart, that's safe. And so you maximize those, right? You put players in positions repeatedly through spring football of things that you want to emphasize. So for example, let's say like when people think physicality, you think about blocking, you think about tackling, right? Okay. Well, we're going to, over rep those situations for all positions, however they might look like blocking for perimeter players and getting off of blocks for perimeter players on defense looks a little bit different than maybe a D tackle and a guard in the center, right? But we're going to set up drills, we're going to call plays that are going to emphasize those kind of things throughout all the spring and expect and demand our players to block well, to break tackles on the defense side of the ball. They're going to be expecting to get off of blocks and make tackles in space. And so you really modify probably what you call, right, and install as an offense. You make sure, and you're really intentional, and I think that we've done a good job about this, as a program of being intentional about, okay, hey, you want to be more physical, but to your point, what does that mean? What does that actually look like? And then communicate to the kids. So we're doing this drill because we want you to understand that we want to be more physical, right? So maybe it's just a perimeter blocking drill. Maybe it's a combination block inside with tackles and tight ends and D ends and linebackers, stuff like that, where that they can get a lot of reps of executing their technique, right? Which when you're doing that well and you're straining, that's where physicality should show up.
Obviously, when it's more physical, guys have a tendency to get banged up as well. How do you weigh those two things? Lance talked about running back position, offensive line as well. How do you just weigh those two things?
Well, you want, again, you talk about safety, you're always going to err on the side of caution, and you're listening to the medical staff of things, but you want players to understand that physical football doesn't necessarily mean putting yourself in a vulnerable or compromised position, right? And that goes back to some of the mundane skills that we would teach our kids in terms of technique and stuff like that. Like we start every practice, and I think most of you have been out there to see it, where our whole team does a blow delivery drill. We teach the fundamentals of how, for on offense to block and on defense how to, shock and get off of a block, right? We do that every day is a good example, right? So we're teaching the fundamental techniques that we don't want guys to get hurt when you amp up the physicality. Is it a little bit of a byproduct of practicing that way? Sure it is, right? To date, nothing, has been serious and stuff, other than beyond a couple of bumps and bruises and being smart with guys. But I think for the most part as a program, and certainly I feel like on our side of the ball, the players that we're really trying to get that physicality out of have responded well this spring. So, but you would modify accordingly if it ever got, to the point where it's so bad you're down so many guys or so many whatever, right?
Yeah. We've talked a lot about offensive line depth, I think, over the last year or so. Just for you this spring, where do you feel like the depth is at on the offensive line?
Well, I think the last time we talked, it was after practice 1. Does that sound about right? Okay, after practice 1. And I still feel the same way, as I feel like there's a lot of pieces there that we have to develop and mold. Now, the mistake that we haven't made, and we won't, and our players aren't either, is that you just assume that just because a player is a year older is that he's a year better, right? No, that has to be, you have to have the will to do it. You have to have the discipline to grow, and you have to be the toughness to grow, right? And do the things that the coaches are asking. So specifically that position, what Coach Fuchs is doing and what he's demanding out of them. We've had a lot of moving pieces because you've heard me saying here before, we want to know what players are capable of. And then let's find their limitation. Let's find their mental limitation. Let's find their physical limitation. And the only way that you can do that is through experience and reps. And so spring gives us a great opportunity to evaluate those things. But I'm pleased with the depth. Without getting in all the names, you guys know the names, you've been on the, you know what I mean? But I'm pleased with where that's going.
The running back room has been one that's been hampered by injury. How have you guys tried to handle that while still progressing as an offense, knowing that you haven't always had a full complement of scholarship guys?
Well, there's a couple different ways that you approach something like that, and we employed both next man up mentality, right? Okay, so if someone can't take reps, someone's got to, right, at that position. We're going to do it. So you approach that. That the depth chart, or if you want to call it the roster at that position, right? The next guy is going to go in and get the reps and make a meaningful impact. And then you're still being smart and you're cognizant. It's kind of like in youth baseball, right? They got a pitch count, right? You know what I mean? There's so many pitches and you got to get out. Well, kind of internal hit count on how many guys you want to see maybe take a live rep and things like that. And so next man up, make sure they're getting the reps, the number of reps that you want them to take in those scenarios. And then you would also, you could modify what you're calling, right? You know what I mean? Maybe it means you pass the ball a little bit more. Maybe you spit some things out. Maybe you put a receiver in the backfield or a tight end. You know what I mean? We hand the ball off to Jared Casey, whatever it might be. You start to do things maybe schematically that you would approach it like you would during the season, right? This is how we have to adjust if these guys aren't available.
Have you been able to see Devin still progress, even though he's been one of those guys that's hard at times?
Yeah, he has. You know what I mean? He's gotten better through the spring like that. I know he probably didn't get as many reps as he wants, and us neither. But he's been a starter for 2 years too, right, at that position, so he knows what's going on. You're right, but like I had said earlier, nobody just gets better because they're a year older, right? They get better because they work for an extra year, and he's doing that for sure.
Have you noticed anything different with him focusing just on football and not baseball as well, or from your perspective, do you not really see a whole lot?
I think that you could say the same thing about him and Trevor, right? I think they'll notice it more when they get into fall, right? I think both those guys have had a great spring. TK's had a great spring. I would say that you can notice that now. He would tell you if you asked him that question, he'd be like, yeah, I'm just a little bit fresher. And you imagine just the time demands of doing two things is challenging. But it just allows them to focus and master their craft as a running back or a tight end in those two guys' situations. It really does. It takes something. It's pretty unique to be able to do two things like that, right? It's less than the 1% of Division I athletes that are playing multiple sports that way, right? It's hard. So they've been able to really focus on what they're doing.
Andy, you've been with Lance for a long time. Is this the most physical spring you guys have had?
Probably. You know what I mean? It's hard to think. You go back all these different springs, been 11 of them now. I know that we're more intentional about developing it, so the answer would probably be yes. And we try to be really intentional about a lot of things that we do. I would say yes. And we're practicing at a good length. You know what I mean? We're expecting it. The rules of engagement in terms of how much tackling and stuff like that. Again, it's usually capped by the NCAA. But I think the number of group drills that we're doing daily. When I say group drills, I'm talking about how many times do maybe running backs and linebackers, or tight ends get together and work on blocks and block destruction, right? How many times do receivers and DBs get together to do that stuff? How many times are are those guys getting tackled in space and we're setting up those drills? We're doing a lot more of that, I would say. So I would say the answer is yes.
Is that the evolution of you guys as a staff, or does that have anything to do with Big 12 football, or?
Well, that's a good question. That's just simply, we challenge our players to this all the time too. It's like reflect on what you want more and emphasize the hell out of it. You want to, you know what I mean? You want this out of a team or a group of people, emphasize it. Right? And not that we weren't talking about playing physical football in the fall, you know what I mean? But it's like, okay, we want to improve in this area. Let's make sure and our team accepts that, right? You know what I mean? So like, I think, I said this to the offensive kids just the other day in a meeting. Okay, and you go back into college, right? They make you write a reflection paper on it. There's an assignment now, you got to write a reflection. I said, but in hindsight, it's the most powerful thing that you can learn to do is self-reflect on what I got to get better at and what I'm good at, right? So here you are in a great opportunity of spring football to develop as a football team. Let's have some ideas specifically of things that we want to improve on. So they're looking at it. We say, this is what we want to go on. We allow them to tell us, here's an individual I want to work on. Here's my next step. I want to be more physical. Okay, great. We won't need that for a football team. Here's how we're doing it. So it isn't necessarily like an overcorrection or a reaction if some things are going poorly. Every cycle, every week, you need to evaluate where you're at as a program and what do we need to emphasize more. And that's just one component of it.
Andy, what does this spring look like for Jason Bean in terms of playing quarterback, maybe some other positions moving around?
He's had a really good spring. You know what I mean? In sense of, you saw how we were using him in the fall and doing some things with him from a diversity standpoint. I've always said, and I will forever, you figure out ways to get players in the field and do what they do best. Jason's got elite speed, right? Let's figure out how to utilize that more in our football team. And of course, you gotta be careful. You don't start developing someone to be a jack of all trades and a master of none. And he's done a great job of balancing everything we've done with him.
You talked about Kobe Baines, I think, the first time we talked to him, getting the reps during fall. But this spring, what did you see from him? I see
him, much like we talked about before with the offensive line, the ability to play both the right guard, right tackle position, bouncing in and out of there. And when he flashes, he shows some really impressive things when he flashes. Like his high is high. You get real excited about him, right? But like anybody who doesn't have a lot of experience, the flip side of the highs are high, the lows can be low, right? So these are things he knows, and we continue to look for consistency with our players and everything we do, which goes back to the way that we practice, the number of reps that we get in individual drills and group drills and team drills, because you can't get better unless you get experience. He's not going to get better sitting there watching Armarze take a rep or watching Bryce take her. He needs to go do them. So you got to take the reps, and he's done a great job. You know what I mean? He shows athletic, and he shows some nasty and physicality that I get excited about. But it's about putting them together consistently.
Yeah, you mentioned the highs. What you mentioned there too, is that it with him? When you see the ceiling, what exactly does that look like?
What does his ceiling look like, man? I don't know. You don't want to pigeonhole a guy and say, well, here. But I mean, when you look for offensive line play and you look for good offensive linemen, what are the traits do they all have? They have the ability to be physical. They have the ability to react really well. They have good short area quickness, right? They're usually big, okay, right? And they're smart enough to know what's going on up front to react to all the different stimulus that can occur in the box. Those are the things that you see from good O-line, you know what I mean, that are playing at a high level in college and in the pros. And you see that from a lot of our linemen at times, right? But again, it will be about doing it consistently over and over again.
Coach, you talked about the running back group, specifically with a guy like Daniel Highshaw with the way his season ended last year. How much is he just chomping at the bit to get back out there?
Oh, I tell you what, I appreciate him. Right, anyone who has ever, and I think I speak for all athletes, if you've ever been through an injury before, how mentally and emotionally draining that can be, and to be so close it's like I guess I've never ran a marathon, but I've run a couple half marathons, surprisingly. Okay, it's fact. You can probably Google it and find it out there, 2 of them. Anyway, at the very end of that marathon, that last 6 miles, that's the hard one, right? It just gets harder. So when you're rehabbing from an injury, it's that last little bit before you really feel like, man, I'm back to where I need to be. And he's kind of in that phase right now. And, I appreciate how he's been going about his business to get himself back out there. And he's staying engaged, and I think that's what you look for with guys who physically can't do everything. Are they mentally, emotionally engaged in what's going on a daily basis, and he's been able to do that.
You talk about physicality. Does he run about as physical as anybody?
He's one, yeah, for sure. He's one of the most powerful people I've ever been around. and that translates in his running ability for sure. The ability to run people over, run away from him. It's a fun combination to be able to observe and see. So looking forward to him continue to grow, get back.
Coach, you have so many returning key pieces of this offense. How much confidence does that instill in you guys heading into the next season?
Well, conventional wisdom says a lot of pieces coming back equates to just being better. And I've really challenged our players. I've challenged myself, the rest of the staff, that we cannot think that way. And I think I've said it here a couple of times. Just because you're returning doesn't mean that you're better. You need to will yourself to be better, and you need to improve, and you got to accept, things that you need to get better at, and you got to recognize what you do well. And like I've said repeatedly, just the reps that we get allow us to see that. We are very capable in all positions to show flashes of greatness at a given moment in practice, but we're looking for guys who can consistently do it better over and over and over again. And again, we go back to our intentions and what we're trying to do as an offense, and why we're doing the drills that we're doing, and guys accept that, and they're improving. Should we be excited about the guys we got coming back? Absolutely. But I said you're as close to not winning a game as close to winning all of them, right? You go either direction based off of how you prepare yourself. And so I've been pleased through 14 practices, just finished number 14, tomorrow being the last. I think our guys have had a pretty good growth mindset. You know what I mean? And we have not done anything to allow us to be bored, right? Like we've kept pushing, and they've kept responding correctly. And so I'm proud of them right now. But got a long way to go before we start playing games in the fall for sure.
When we talked to Ethan, I think earlier this spring, he talked about learning from Jason and Jalen and being willing to kind of bide his time. Have you seen him take in everything this spring and improve?
His growth has been, I tell you what, I'll say with him specifically, the thing that I don't want to say surprised me, but the thing that he's flashed the most is his athletic ability. Like, he runs around really, really well, and he's got a great vision as a ball carrier, and I think he's pretty tough. You know what I mean? Okay? So you have to, you don't want to train all your players to just do all these different things and not really be able to be good. Like, still as a quarterback, fundamentally, you have to be, effectively deliver the football and show up in critical situations. And to force him in those environments over and over again through practice is really, really impressive. But he, much like a lot of our guys, they go into the spring and they recognize the things that they're getting better at, and there's growth, and they're trying to attack, get better at those things. And I love it. He comes, spends all the time in the office, goes through with Coach Z. Coach Z's doing a great job with all those guys. And he just knows that his moment's coming, and he's getting ready to capitalize it. So he's had a bunch of reps, and it's been a great spring for him. I mean, think about those. I mean, those guys, like this, that's their first spring. You know what I mean? It's like, man, how many of those guys, and you just think about what that's like. We got a bunch of guys who are supposed to be, not a bunch, but supposed to be in high school right now, right? Going to prom. It's like, here they are, finishing 14 practices in spring. It's pretty impressive.
You mentioned them, I guess Calvin.
Jaden, Calvin,
yeah.
Right? Those two guys on our side of the ball, Raz, like they're so we'll have, one of the things that's coming up for us, we'll have year-end meetings with all of our players, kind of, here's where we're at, how do you feel like it's going? We're looking just a dialogue back and forth, and we'll show, we're going to intention. Here's your first rep of college football. Here's your last rep. And they look totally different. Every one of them do. They look totally different, which is a credit to them and their ability to grow.
Anything else, Coach?